Hi everybody, welcome to Brain Breaks with Miss Kateri. Today we will be doing comic book making. So what you need, nothing much. You can use lined paper or plain paper. You know, if at the ending stages you'll need more complex materials, you'll need colored pencils, thin Sharpies, rulers, but for right now, the planning stages, all you need really is paper and pencil. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a comic book. And so a comic book is or a graphic novel is a visual form of storytelling that has images and text together. So they're presented usually in panels. And I'm sure you guys have all seen a comic book before. But in 1930 to the 1950 was the golden age of comic books. And so it introduced superheroes, and those are a really big focus of comic books. I'm sure, as you know, that have transformed into movies that are still playing to this day, including Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Captain America, and Wonder Woman. And then in the 1980s to now is the present modern age of comics. And it's expanding the typical style, showing underrepresented voices, and has more people publishing on the internet or with independent publishers, which means that there's a lot more comics, a lot more diversity. Okay, and so there's a lot of different roles in terms of making a comic book. So we have the writer, the editor, the artist, the letterer, the person who does the fancy fonts, and the colorist. And so all of these different roles have different talents and people who are interested in different types. So if you think that you're interested in one type and you already know, I would still encourage you to try out other types and other roles just to see if what you're truly gifted at and what you might need to work a little harder at, but what you really enjoy. And so sometimes people get really stuck on coming up with an idea. And so a couple tips is, one, think of a short story idea that would work visually, such as large, easy to define moments and really big, enthusiastic characters and a lot of dialogue, which means a lot of talking. Next, you need to work out the rough structure. So think about what is going to happen in your story. And so this is where we get into the planning stages. And we're going to write personality profiles of your characters. So we have to think really hard about who are they? What do they want? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What are they good and bad at? Where do they start and where do they end at their story? And you have to think about what is the conflict? What's the issue of your story? And what does the main character overcome throughout your story? And you also want to think about really cool settings and emotions and represent these in your comic books. So now that you have your basic idea, you have to kind of think of a theme. And I would suggest branching out and incorporating things that you aren't typically interested in to be part of your theme. For example, if I'm really into horseback riding, the entire comic book isn't only going to include me on a farm riding horses and doing what I love, because then there's no problem, there's no issue that the main character has to overcome. So I would suggest to include things that you are not normally comfortable with. For example, a motorcycle randomly appears on the horse farm. What are you going to do about it? So include things and objects and ideas that you don't normally work with to branch out. And so once you have your ideas, you have to do character, prop, and location sketches. And so these sketches are going to help you come up with an idea for your character, and you're going to do them in your character sketches. You're going to include the whole body, maybe some front, back, side view, and the color palette. So does this character always wear red? Does this character always wear black? Does this character have really crazy hair that it's their signature thing? And they should have some design sheets. You might need to make a couple, but for smaller characters, you really don't need to. I would suggest only doing character sheets for the ones that are most recurring and most important. And I would suggest drawing them happy and sad and angry in a couple different ways. You can see my rudimentary drawings here, because that way, what do they look like running or jumping or in different emotions or in a fight scene? That way you can really conceptualize everything. And then your prop design sheet. So for example, you might not have to do this. It depends on whether or not there's a bunch of fancy stuff. But for example, if there are weapons or other types of items that really are very intricate and require special design, I would suggest drawing them out. Your locations, especially ones that are really important to your story, you need to draw it out and figure out how the world works. Because you don't want to have, for example, if you have magic in your world, you don't want to have it work in one way in one panel and then the rules be different in another panel, because that's just not fun. And so sometimes if there are robots in the series, you can do some mechanical designs. It all depends on what your world is and what your comic is going to look like, how detailed, how long it's going to be. Okay, so now that we have our characters, props, locations, etc. all sorted out, we have to decide on the storyline. So these storylines could be like a really quick joke comic. Maybe that's your thing. You're doing a new comic every week. You're doing a 3-panel, haha, the last panel is the punchline. And then otherwise, you might want to have if you're doing more of a graphic novel, like a book, or if you're just doing like a comic strip that comes every week that you need to plan out more, maybe you want to think about it more. So you have to think about what your character wants. So plan your story, give your character a hope, a want, or a goal, and then put something in the way of their goal or what they want, and that way they have to struggle. They have to work for what they want. And then you can use this sentence, for example, my character wants blank, but blank, so blank. For example, Ted is a dragon who wants a friend, but everyone is scared of his fire breath. So he lets them roast marshmallows in his fire breath. And so if you're a polar bear, we have actually kind of talked about this before. Okay, and so before you start drawing, you need to plan how your story is going to go. Say it out loud. Point to each panel and say, this is going to happen then this, then this. And then after you have a story that makes sense in order, you need to think about dialogue, because that's the main writing in comic books, right? Is dialogue, is what characters say, the speech. So you need to think about that. I would suggest creating a sample page. So, doing a couple panels and saying, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here. And then you can point to each panel and what's happening in each panel. And then you can number these pages. And then you also should think about what you want your comic to look like. So if your story, you want it to be all black and red, or if you want it to be all black and white, or if you want it to be in really bright colors that pop, or if you want to do a traditional comic book style, which is called pop art. There are lots of different things that you can do and lots of different styles that you can have. And so once you have your story in order, maybe you can think about how you're going to use each panel to tell that specific part of your story. So you need to be mindful of the amount and type of information that needs to be present on each page. And you need to try and attribute space accordingly. So for example, a location is going to need a nice long shot because you have to know where you are, what's going on. But if it's just, an introduction to a character, it can be a really skinny shot because you're just saying, this is Ted the Dragon. Okay, and so when you sketch out your action dialogue, you need to just think about what they're going to say or what you want them to say, and then you can work on making it sound better and sound nicer. Okay. And so once you have your story and your dialogue, then you're ready to do the fun part, which is writing it all out in panel form. And so that part is definitely difficult, but I have total faith in you, and I know that these will end up great. And so you have your layout sheet. Sometimes some people like to use poster board and then cut up their different panels and then kind of put them in order of the way that they want. Or if you totally know what you want, you don't have to do that. But you definitely need to draft. Maybe you could send it to me to have me look at it. You can send it to a friend. You can ask your parents or your siblings to look at it. You need to make sure that you are looking and double checking and triple checking that this is the way you want your story to go. And this is the way you want the illustrations to look. And so definitely make sure that you leave room for word balloons. For example, if this is my drawing, then there's no space for me to write what this character is saying or what's going on. And this little part between the panels is called the gutter, because if they're all really close together, it'd be really difficult to see what the progression is, that this panel is different from this panel. especially if it's really busy, if there's a lot of stuff going on, you have to make sure that you have a gutter. And the gutter should also exist between these two panels. So for example, you just need a little tiny space in between each panel. And make sure that the first draft you do it in pencil, and then you can trace with thin Sharpie. I will be putting up some of these resources, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.